Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. We are on our fourth episode talking about the giant Dean William McNulty, probably the most impactful figures, one of the most impactful figures in the history of our diocese. We left Dean McNulty encouraging temperance among his congregation by visiting bars on Friday afternoon to make sure that the men of the parish didn't spend their whole paycheck.
Yeah.
So Dean McNulty had a social consciousness, was aware of the challenges facing the men and women of his day, and began social services.
One of the most forward-thinking, looking at things from today, is a institution that hardly ever gets mentioned, but the St. Francis Residence for Women was started by Dean McNulty. And this one was when women were first beginning to enter the workforce.
In the silk industry, predominantly?
Well, or as secretaries.
Oh, okay.
And so he creates basically a hotel, a hostel for young single women who are working in the city so that they can live in a good Christian environment.
Yeah.
By today's standards, for somebody who started as a pastor in 1860, you would not think that he would be that adaptable.
Yeah, amazing. I was surprised that the hospital started by the Sisters of Charity started with only 4 sisters. Is that right?
Yeah.
So this would be when
they celebrated their 150th anniversary, I guess it was recently. We had fun trying to decide which building in downtown Paterson was the site of the original hospital and, to put a plaque on it. But very soon they bought this estate on Upper Main Street, the Fonda estate.
Yeah.
But it grew so rapidly, and it was one of the dean's favorite, charities. He would always be raising funds for it.
This is St.
Joseph's Hospital,
right.
A medical center today.
Yeah.
You can hardly find the original part of that hospital. To find the cornerstone there is a...
But is the original building still in...
Not the original, but the first one that they built is somewhere in the middle of that complex, but they've added and,
Yeah. And what would a hospital have been like in those days? Would the sisters have been nurses?
Yeah.
Studied nursing?
Well, probably just beginning to do that to the extent that it was, available. And also ultimately creating what really doesn't exist for the most part anymore, a hospital school of nursing. As late as the 50s and 60s, St. Joseph's, All Souls in Morristown, and St. Mary's in Passaic all had their own
teaching,
what we would call today a junior college, a nursing school.
Oh.
Today, you'd be expected to get a bachelor's degree in nursing, but back then you could be a registered nurse. You had gone through nurses training. And
there were 4 of them, and what struck me is that the Sisters of Charity had to be beggars in order to fund the operation. So you talked about Sister Hildegard in a black Mariah.
Yes.
Now, what most of us don't know what
It's
a black
basically
Mariah is.
a buggy.
Paddy wagon.
Yeah, a buggy, you know,
Yeah.
an enclosed
And she would go out every week and
to the factories and
for handouts
for
to
handouts,
keep the operation going.
Yeah.
And Dean McNulty, from his early years, had a connection to the Sisters of Charity. And it seems whenever he was beginning one of these initiatives, he would tap the sisters and they would respond.
Yeah.
So there's
I think he and Mother Xavier had comparable visions.
Yeah, we're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, cut from the same cloth, and they were. So you have the hospital, but also the orphanage. You know what ultimately will be Mount St. Joseph's that was only torn down a few years ago.
Yeah,
that piece of property was the old shepherd farm from the river all the way up to where the Little Sisters are now.
Okay.
And so you had McNulty will develop that into the cemetery, and then also the orphanage, and then up on top of the hill, past his time, the Little Sisters of the Poor. But originally, it's all one piece of property.
So you mentioned the cemetery that he began, which is Holy Sepulchre.
Right. There was a cemetery right across the street from St. Joseph's called Sandy Hill Cemetery. And at some point, the municipal authorities in Paterson decided that there would be no cemeteries in the city boundaries. So they had to move all the graves out of that. It's now Sandy Hill Park.
Okay.
So McNulty develops part of the Shepherd Farm, which I think he already owned it. At this point, there's a orphanage right near the river that ultimately will be taken down and a new one built further up on the property. But he develops that as Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. And as you mentioned, that was once a drilling field for American troops in the Revolution. You know.
Yeah, so I was gonna pose a
Tie
question
into
that way.
the Dye Mansion and Washington and Totowa.
Yeah,
and all
so
of that.
our diocesan cemetery was a training ground for revolutionary soldiers. Interesting.
There's an interesting detail. Again, you know, it's legendary, but you're not sure that it's factual, but it seems like it is. You know, as Paterson changes and the population begins moving further up Broadway, there develops a very, very strong rivalry between St. Joseph's and St. John's in Paterson.
The parishes.
Yeah. And eventually, by the time the dean dies, they both have their own parish high school, which just exacerbates the rivalry. No end.
Yeah.
But if you drive through Paterson on Route 80,
which many of us do,
and stop dead in your tracks for a moment, which you should not do, and gaze at the city, you know, the cathedral is obvious right in front of you. But if you look at the hill behind it, you can see St. Joseph's. And the story is that St. Joseph's was meant to have a steeple, but that the dean kind of maneuvered so that it would not be built, because that would have made St. Joseph's taller on the horizon than the cathedral was. And so when you look at it from the Route 80 perspective, you can see that St. Joseph's is kind of a stunted. There you can tell that it was meant to have a steeple.
We used to drive to my cousins on Long Island, and every time we passed through Paterson, my mother would say, "Look to your left, the city of churches, the city of churches."
Yeah.
Most of them begun by McNulty.
McNulty.
So Mother Clare is another towering figure, right? So does she succeed a Mother Xavier?
No. This is are you talking about St. Joseph's Hospital now? Or?
I think so, yeah. She was a long-term leader at...
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. So she wasn't superior to the community.
No.
But she was referred to as Mother?
Well, Mother Clare in the sense of the hospital,
Yeah.
That's a popular name for her.
And
the hospital has a succession of them, like Jean Reagan and Sir Jane Wall, ultimately all
very
kind of had
strong
that title, even
leaders.
though
Yeah,
technically they're not.
But Mother Claire was head of St. Joseph's Hospital for 40 years or something. And again, did this monumental service as the hospital expanded. And
vision and ability to raise funds and engage the community. And
amazing.
Yeah.
So McNulty is also making sure that catechesis occurs. And there was a little detail that you mentioned, that they were doing catechesis in the Passaic County Jail.
Yeah. The dean had a highly organized, actually separately incorporated from the cathedral parish, religious ed program called the St. John's Sunday School Teachers Association. And this became not only catechetical, but also the social outreach of the parish. So this was a highly organized group who provided catechetical instruction not only in the parish, but also in the high school, in the jail, the Passaic County Jail, which is
amazing.
right across the street from the cathedral. But
was it the jail there then?
yes, yeah. But this group also provided like youth work, CYO, everything that we would. They were mounting athletic teams.
Yeah, wow.
They were mounting parish plays.
Yeah.
Eventually, they take on a title, a name for themselves, and also for the building, the old church, the Entre Nous. A very flashy French title. Among ourselves, or kind of like our thing.
Yeah.
And this became like the social, athletic.
So let me just
theatrical arm of the parish.
So the old church on Oliver Street,
still standing,
right, becomes what do you call it? A lyceum?
A lyceum, yeah. Basically, that is where the school recentered itself.
Okay, and an addition was put on.
The front was
and named
adapted.
Entre Nous, Among Us, or Our Thing.
Our Thing, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
when I first, entered the seminary, stuff was still going on there.
I remember that.
Like the dinner honoring Bishop Casey at his welcome into Paterson was in the Entre Nous, and I had no idea what the Entre Nous was. I'd never heard that term before. You had to be from Paterson to know what the Entre Nous was.
I actually think it was still around when I was ordained.
Yeah.
So the Entre Nous was more than a school.
More than a school. It was a whole cultural arm of the parish.
Yes.
As the parish is developing, so much of what we would think of today, as youth ministry
was happening there.
CYO, parish theatrical society. This was all Entre Nous.
So one interesting detail is that the football team, St. John's football team,
right,
defeated
Princeton University.
That was the shockwave around the world.
Well, it was the early days of football. I think both collegiate and
high school.
It probably says something more about the state of collegiate athletics at the time that a local parish in North Jersey could defeat them.
So during his long tenure, you mentioned that Dean McNulty had 60 assistant priests over the years.
Yeah.
So 60 younger guys worked with him and in some way probably were mentored by him. That's amazing. Yeah.
And that would continue at the cathedral for years. I once did a talk on the impact of the cathedral. I think it was when we were trying to raise funds for this most recent renovation.
Yeah.
And I did a talk on the connecting links between the cathedral to all the other parishes of the diocese. How many of the other churches of the diocese had been built by a priest who got his start at St. John's?
Yes. I think that might have been here, that program, that talk. Was that
maybe,
possible?
yeah. No, I think actually it was in the cathedral itself.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'm taking
I think
credit.
Bishop Saratelli was trying to sell, his program, and so I gave this talk. But, the impact of the dean's alumni, both his alumni who had been assigned there, and also the alumni who had grown up in the parish.
Oh,
You know, he had a long-reaching impact,
yeah.
you know, well past his. Kieran McHugh, who you and I both know.
Right.
you
His
know,
first assignment was there?
His
At the
first
cathedral?
assignment was there, and he you know, most of his career in Sussex County as director of Pope John. But he has a sense of history, and he was very proud of the fact that he was the last Irish-born curate, you know, after like 150 years of them.
Yes.
You know, these guys would come over and they'd be assigned to Dean McNulty first, and Kieran was the last Irish-born priest at St. John's Cathedral,
Yes. Wow.
the end of a line, so to speak.
Yeah. I'm going to keep us moving here, but I wanted to mention Father Patrick McGann.
Again, yeah.
Father Patrick McGann was a parochial vicar, an assistant,
Right.
who ran
Came
into
over from Ireland.
Right.
Eventually becomes pastor of Mount Hope
Yeah. In
Morris
Rockaway,
County. Yeah.
But he kept a notebook,
He did.
and you have excerpts here that are really
right, because
interesting.
we have the notebook in the archives. It's what they call a vademecum.
Along with me,
Kind of notes to himself about adapting his pastoral training from Ireland to the American scene.
So interesting.
And he has a couple of, you know, funny little comments there. He says, you know, about baptism, he says, if they choose to call their son George Washington, you know, if they choose to baptize him George Washington, whatever.
Yeah.
He says, you know, just ignore the fact that Washington is not a Christian name.
Just
Just go with the flow.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. He's got another detail about not imposing rules on grown people, but working with the children.
Right,
You want to say a word about that?
So many of them were uncatechized or just very basically catechized. So, you know, to talk to them about rules of fasting, for example, or all of that, you know, is way over their heads.
He said with the adults, it's almost not worth it.
Right. And you know, they had at this point a very strong program of the annual parish mission, which we would almost call today the new evangelization, trying to reawaken the faith in the adults.
Yes.
But in many cases, you're, you know, introducing issues for the first time to them.
Yes.
So, you know, he says, you know, don't waste your time.
Really do the intensive formation of children.
Right. Trying to do the letter of the law with the adults. It's, you know, go after the kids and let's work with the next generation.
And
he has a fascinating comment in there about First Communion.
Yeah.
That, you know, you should hire a brass band.
Yeah, make it memorable.
Make it as big a deal as possible. You know,
Yes.
and those of us who have dealt with First Communion and parents' expectations over the years, you know, look back and say, "What are you, crazy?" But his comment was, you know, make it as big a deal as possible so that they never forget this event, and it sticks with them all their life. You know.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention is you say McGann notes some sage advice to homilists. I got to read this. Never scold the people. Never call them opprobrious names. This is to be blamed in Europe as well in America, but in America, one imprudent sermon with a good deal of scolding might break down a priest and prevent him from doing any good in the congregation. He will have to leave and be sent elsewhere. Yeah. Wow, the power of a homily to do good or ill.
He also talks in there about being careful how you refer to non-Catholics. That, that the strong divisions that you would find in Europe, you know,
don't exist here.
Don't exist here in the same way, and be careful not to be too strong in denouncing Protestants because, you know, here we married them, we don't denounce them.
Yeah. That's a great little section. So I'm going to keep us moving. In connection with Father McGann, you get into Americanism and division in the church, and we don't have a lot of time, but I just am...
Americanism was a movement in the 1890s that basically, it for a brief period, you know, it's actually a strong suit in religion in America, period. We just came to it late This is the same thing that was the Great Awakening among the Protestants on the frontier in the 1830s. It's what, the vision that the Pilgrims had when they came over, that this was the new Zion, the new Jerusalem over here, a clean slate where we can make true religion. So for Catholics in the 1890s, there was a strong feeling among mostly some of the clergy that, America was the future of the church. They really felt that by this time, the headquarters of the church would be in America, that the Pope would have moved here, because this was the future. And it had some practical impacts. For example, many of them were opposed to Catholic schools because they saw them as ghettoizing the Catholic kids when they should actually be in the public school evangelizing, because eventually America is going to be all Catholic, because it'll just be so obvious to people that America and Catholicism are perfectly matched for each other.
There was a problem between the German clergy and the Irish a little bit that played into this. Or that was a result of this.
One of the aspects of Americanism was, you do not provide language services, because that, again, helps to ghettoize. They should be learning English and getting on board the program.
Establish national churches or the languages. So it turns out
they were very critical of Bishop Wigger, who is one of the leaders of the conservative movement in this period. Wigger was multilingual, and when he would preach in German at a parish, even though he was born in Newark, he could handle. And, they were very critical of him when he would preach in anything other than English.
Wow. And so there was conflict with McGann and between Wigger and McGann, and also it resulted in conflict between Dean McNulty and Wigger.
Basically, Wigger, I forget the exact incident, but there were several of them over the years.
It's interesting reading.
The New Jersey pastors who were on the Americanism side constantly criticized Wigger. And then he had a short fuse, and he would excommunicate them, and it went back and forth.
And this is all playing out in the press.
In the press,
sometimes.
yes, because there was so much press, they would grab a hold of this.
And so, we think divisions and fissures in the church and people going at one another. We tend to think this is a 21st century issue. It reminded me of today.
Yes,
what was going on, and the dirty laundry being aired.
Well, some of the comments recently about the bishop in Texas,
yes,
who has been critical of other bishops not towing the line.
Is it Strickland?
Strickland, right?
Yeah.
I saw one commentator say that this is the first time since the 1890s that we've heard an American bishop publicly criticizing another American bishop. Yeah. Because after this thing was so hot that when it was over, they kind of all said, "All right, we're never going to do this again.
This is
this is the end of this public airing of our laundry."
Yeah.
But
and we managed not to do it for 100 years.
Yeah, McNulty was kind of a leader, if you will, of the Americanism faction in the Newark clergy.
Yeah.
And at one point, to kind of punish him, Wigger removed his first curate. And this is a time when the cathedral had 4 priests at a time, and the first curate, especially as McNulty was beginning to age, the first curate, that was a major responsibility.
Yeah.
So Wigger pulled him and assigned him elsewhere and didn't replace him.
Oh, boy.
And, Wigger sent a very sharply worded letter to Wigger saying, how do you expect me to...
Yeah, that's quoted in here.
How do you expect me to run this place, if you don't send me somebody of quality that can take over the first curacy of the...
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Dean McNulty's name is going to come up again and again in ensuing episodes, but I want to finish... I started talking about him by quoting Monsignor Kupke from his book, and he set this section up beautifully. And the ending of this chapter moved me almost to copious tears. So here's the end of the story of Dean McNulty. At a later date, the body of the dean was brought back to the city to lie in front of his church beneath Gaetano Federici's statue of him sharing the confidence of a young boy. It could have been any boy, a schoolboy, an orphan, a newsboy, or an altar boy. He would have understood them all. When Dean McNulty drove through the city, even Protestant children would run after his carriage and call out, "Father Mac, you know me." Indeed, he did. He knew Paterson and its hopes and dreams and challenges, and Paterson and its church are still basking in the warmth of his response. Dean McNulty, pray for us. Let's leave it there. I want all of you who are listening or watching to make sure that you keep an eye out or an ear out for the next episode of Coffee with Kupke. In order to stay on top of new releases, make sure you follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you are on YouTube, please do drop a like and hit the bell for notifications. While you're at it, make sure to check out the other shows produced by the diocese. Those shows are Beyond the Beacon, hosted by Bishop Kevin Sweeney and Jay Agnish, our Director of Communications, and the Paul Street Journal, hosted by Brian Hansberger and Freddie Garcia. I want to give a special thanks to Joe Ginexi, our sound and visual engineer, Caitlin Ferrari, who's involved in pre- and post-production, and Freddie Garcia, who's helping out with this podcast in addition to doing his own. With all that said, I just want to thank you for joining us in Coffee with Kupke. Keep making Catholic history in the Diocese of Paterson.